Hello, guys, and welcome to the Penny Podcast. My name is Andrés. I'm in 12th grade, and I am the Capo Student Media Web Producer.
And I'm Alishba, Javaid. I'm also in 12th grade, and I'm a staff writer and videographer.
If this is your first time tuning in, the Penny Podcast is a weekly podcast that incorporates entertainment and interview elements. Please excuse my sound quality as we are recording this episode through Zoom.
This week, our CSM highlight goes to Anvitha Reddy for her article, CHS 9 Kindness Drives Kate's Success in Theater Silver Stars, published under our CHS 9 section. I'll recite the opening to her article. Teeming with excitement, freshman Grace Cates received special permission from Melva Smith School of Dance in Coppell to join a dance at just 2 years old. 12 years later, Cates is a part of Silver Stars, Coppell High School's JV drill team, and works as a stage manager for CHS Theater. Being able to entertain an audience pushed Cates into both activities where she has found great joy. To read the rest of Anvitha's article, visit coppellstudentmedia.com.
This week on One Shot, Columbia University recently announced the 2020 Pulitzer Prize winners. The talented list of individuals and teams which received the Pulitzer Prize span over 23 categories, each with a respective focus. My personal favorite piece of media which won a Pulitzer Prize was the musical A Strange Loop by Michael R. Jackson. I haven't been able to watch the musical in person, but from videos on YouTube, it looks extremely deserving of the prestigious award. Speaking of journalism, today's Penny Podcast interview guest is our very own psychic advisor, Chase Wofford. Known for his exemplary leadership abilities, down-to-earth personality, and advanced skills in journalism, he has led the Sidekick and its yearly rotating staff to countless awards and recognitions. He is the man behind it all. Behind every story, photograph, design, video, and podcast that gets published on capostudentmedia.com and /or each of our 6 yearly issues. It only makes sense that we had to interview him one day. So, Mr. Wofford, in your eyes, what makes journalism stand out from all the other mass communication-based careers, such as advertising, marketing, and corporate communications?
First off, Andrés, thank you for the intro there and building me up like that. That's a lot to live up to in this. But I think to answer your question, and thank you for having me on. This is really, really cool. I get to see kind of behind the scenes how this works. But I think where journalism differs from other fields of communications is it's more about service. It's, we talk about it being the only protected job in the Constitution. I mean, freedom of the press is critical in a democratic society. So it's a different role to play where you are, yes, there's ways where it is a business, of course, and we've seen kind of the negative side effects to that over the years, but I don't think it's ever going to go away because you have to have someone to report the news, to hold people accountable, to get information to an audience, to a community, big or small, because their livelihoods depend on a lot of the decisions being made by their elected officials and how their taxpayer dollars are being spent. And there's just an entertainment value to it as well. There's so many different layers of it that it just plays a different role than if you are in nothing. This is a great field to go into, any field of communications, but being a spokesperson for a company or whatnot, you're kind of working for them, where if you're a journalist, you're working for the people that you serve.
All right, now how were you personally introduced to journalism? What has been your experience to it? Were you always interested in it, or was it fairly new in your life?
I always read newspapers, even as a kid. I'm a dinosaur. I grew up pre-internet, so we had, of course, cable television, and I saw, 24-hour news networks take off when I was, growing up, and we had the nightly news that I watched with my family because I was interested. But I also read a print newspaper every day, and I'll be honest with you, the first thing I would grab was the sports section, and sometimes I didn't get past that, but if I wanted to know how many points Michael Jordan scored the night before, I had to get the newspaper the next day to look that up. If I wanted to see, the box score of a baseball game, but I also liked reading the stories, and the ways to get that was, I could watch Sports Center, which I did a lot because I was a sports fan as a kid, or I could read about it in the newspaper the next day. And we grew up reading the Dallas Morning News, the Dallas Times Herald, which is no longer around. It was bought by the Dallas Morning News because most major cities had two daily newspapers. And we were a family that grew up reading the Dallas Times Herald. And, as we know now, we just have the Dallas Morning News. So as growing up, I always consumed news. I just, and it wasn't that abnormal. I think people hear that now and think, wow, a kid reading the nursepaper. I mean, all my buddies read the sports page, and wanted to see what was going on. But I did go through the rest of the paper because I found it interesting. And I actually, when I went to college, was thinking I would be more of a broadcast journalist and go into television. But as I took more and more courses, I realized I enjoyed and excelled more so in the writing classes I was taking. So it was probably end of the second semester of my sophomore year when I switched to print journalism, which back then you did kind of have to specify which pathway you wanted to go. It wasn't the convergence journalist or, backpack journalist we talk about today, where you learn to do everything. You specialized a little bit more. And then after that, I graduated the journalism degree and I worked in newspapers for a while. And then I started teaching at Coppell as Sidekick advisor in 2005.
Yeah. Do you ever miss strictly consuming news through not digital mediums, not through online or social media?
Yes and no. I'm just like anybody else. I like the convenience of being able to get the news, on your phone in an instant. And I've adapted to that. I mean, I honestly, I don't get the print newspaper delivered to my house anymore. I read the Dallas Morning News online every day. And I hate saying that because I feel kind of like a hypocrite, but it was, as you're looking at your expenses and whatnot, the way for me to be able to consume news and still subscribe and support local journalism, I just do it electronically. But yeah, whenever I travel, whenever I go to a different city, I always pick up a hard copy of their daily newspaper. If I'm going to a college campus or another high school campus, I always find their school newspaper and pick up a hard copy of that. So yeah, I do miss it. That was kind of your routine, but we move a lot faster. Life moves a lot faster now. We don't have the time to, sit and go through all the newspaper, all the pages as we maybe once did. So I guess, I don't know if I answered your question, but it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. What would you say are some good entryways into the world of journalism? Minus all the usual powerhouses that we see today, such as CNN and Fox News.
I'm a big proponent of local news. And by local news, that can be your high school news programs. That can be your local newspaper. That can be your local, when I say local in Dallas-Fort Worth, we're a major market. So think about all the journalists that work in Dallas-Fort Worth on our TV stations or for our newspapers. This is a destination for them. They're not, I guess you can still go to New York or LA, but for the most part, we live in a market where people are trying to get to, if that makes sense. So the quality of that is reflected in what we have. So I really think you start local, and nothing against national news networks. It's different, especially during, you look at during coronavirus, what's happened in New York has been much different than what's happened in other parts of the country. And so, not to say, we don't want to hear what's going on in New York. Of course we do, as American citizens, as human beings or whatnot. That's important for us to know. But at the same time, what does it mean for me going to my grocery store on Denton Tap Road? You're not going to get that on your national, publications or national networks. You're going to get that from your local news. So I think if you're a young journalist, that you don't think of going to the end of the line. You have a goal. I want to go work for ESPN. Okay. Or I want to go work for CNN, or I want to go work for the New York Times. Of course, that's great to have that end goal, but you have to work your way to that. And the way to do that is, earn your stripes in local news, get your experience in local news. And I think whenever you're reporting on a community that you're embedded in and have some sort of connection to, it makes you a better journalist. I'm not saying you can't pick up and move to California or move to Chicago and be a great journalist, But I think if you are, reporting on things that impact your neighbors, your parents, your school, your teachers, your friends, and everybody else, I think that kind of puts you more emotionally invested in the story.
Okay, and as you mentioned with the current state of the nation with the coronavirus outbreak, why do you think it's important now more than ever to have accurate, reliable journalism now? And can you touch on like risks of fake news and the conspiracies and sensational journalism and all that stuff?
Well, first off, I don't think it's any more important now to have accuracy, to have news and reporting that's credible and trusted. I think that whether we're in a pandemic or not should be the standard, the expectation, and you should never, as a journalist, do anything to compromise that or settle for anything less. Now, there's a difference in making a mistake, because journalists human beings are going to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Was the mistake made from sloppy reporting? You wanted to be first to report that story. You wanted to, you just didn't follow the process you should have. Okay. That's the kind of mistakes you can't have. Now, if it's a mistake where somebody told you something and you tried to verify it and they did, your process, you followed it correctly, but a mistake was still the outcome of that. Well, that's different, and that's unfortunately going to happen, but it's usually rare if you follow the process the right way. And, I think the, fake news I think it's a two-way street. And, this isn't a political answer, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are people that if they see news they don't like or agree with, whether it's right or wrong, fake news, right? But there's also times where I said at the start of this answer, people have a different, there's like a lack of fear in some circles of, well, let's get it out there, hope it's right. If it's not, no big deal. Well, when you have that mentality, you kind of give validation to the quote fake news people, right?
Yeah.
And I think journalism is a business, right? I talked about it being a service, but as we've seen, a lack of revenue has cost people jobs. It's cost, newsrooms have had to shut down. So there is still a need to make money. Now, the question is, do some news outlets sensationalize because they know that will drive traffic to their site or drive up their ratings? Fear sometimes does sell. And if you pay attention during this pandemic, how, a lot of stuff that you see it scares the heck out of you, and
Mm-hmm.
one that makes you want to read it and makes you come back or whatnot. Now, hopefully it's accurate that people should be scared. I don't mean that to sound the wrong way, but
Yeah.
You have to be careful. And that's why I go back to local journalism. That's where during this pandemic, I stick to. Now, I read the New York Times every day. Okay. And they have a great coronavirus section that basically tracks, they update this on the hour, cases and where is it increasing around the country or whatnot. I find it fascinating and informative. And it doesn't, it doesn't scare me when I look at it. It alarms me, it makes me alert, makes me aware. But, I view those types of national ways of tackling this as informative. You just got to be careful of, there's nothing really else that's going to top this as a story right now. So sometimes you got 24 hours to fill talking coronavirus. And I think that some, I'm not going to mention which ones I think are more guilty of this than others, but I think it's easy to see some kind of do capitalize on people's fears for readership and viewership.
Yeah. Do you think that the instantaneous nature of social media kind of feeds into that fear as well? I see on Reddit and Twitter, a lot of the times when like a headline is very grabbing and very just bold and out there, I see that if you actually read the article, they kind of contradict themselves most of the time. And I see the comments or like the replies to the tweet. It's like, usually there'd be one journalist in there saying, "Did y'all read the article?" Like, there's more to it than just what the headline says.
Right. And I think that goes back to my response before about how we live in a society where people are on the go. They don't have time to digest news, for the amount of time they did years ago. So they'll skim headlines. They'll see clickbait and not even click it, but they'll see that headline and it'll jump out at them. I was editing a Sidekick story this morning where it was a great story, but then I looked at the headline and it was kind of a shock value headline. I was like, that's not really what this story is about. And we don't want to fall into that trap. But I also don't think social media is reality. And I know people don't agree with me on that, but I don't think that when you scroll through Twitter, all of the stuff that you see truly reflects what everybody out there is feeling, thinking, or doing. Because I think if you do that, the world is a much more negative, bitter, angry place than it is. Now, that doesn't say we don't have anger and hostility and there aren't things going on where people should be upset and whatnot. But most people are more likely to take their rage and anger to social media than to take their positivity and to spread good things happening in the world. That's just the sad reality of where we're at. So I try not to read too much into when you scroll through social media thinking, okay, everyone in this world is miserable, and you just close the lid of your laptop and then you're like, okay, I'm really depressed now. I try not to fall into that trap, but I do think that, news organizations have to be careful because they're embedded in that. And if the content just in the tweet, is misleading, don't think they're going to click on that link and go think, oh, well, no, that's really not that bad or whatever. People are probably just going to read that tweet. They're going to retweet it. They're going to like it. They're going to share it out and whatnot. So you have to be careful of that, because the part of the problem too with social media, and I don't want to sound like angry social media guy that it's a bad thing. No, it has a lot of positives, especially it's kind of in a way saved journalism because it's given us a presence, with people rather than, a newspaper that's sitting on a shelf. And I think that people now can choose what they're exposed to and what they're not exposed to. There's good and bad in that. You don't have to follow the negativity I was talking about, right? You can only follow things that you agree with and make you feel good. But there's a danger in that too, because then you're limiting perspectives, that you're not going to, just because you don't agree with this person or that person and you want to silence them so you never hear them. I don't know if that's necessarily good either. So it's kind of, like I said, there's two sides of it, a double-edged sword.
Well, I know you talked about to sort of lean into like local journalism and in some parts avoid social media, but I think especially now that I know a lot of people are paying attention to news more, what are some better habits that people can adopt to not make them anxious in the amount that they consume on a daily basis with the news?
Well, I think when you consume news is important, especially if you're an emotional person. I think, I don't want to say be sitting at the breakfast table with your family with your face buried in your phone, because I know I tell my kids not to do that. Mm-hmm. But if in the morning while you're eating breakfast, and you're scrolling through your feed and just, doing a little bit of reading to kind of see what's going on, I think that's pretty good. I think as high school journalists, I think whenever you're in D115, when we were able to be in D115, and you're kind of have that mindset of the news, I think take the first 10 minutes of your class and, all right, let me see what's going on. I've kind of been focusing on my other classes all day and everything else, just hanging out with my friends, whatever. Okay, 10 minutes, I'm going to get caught up here and see what's happening in the world. I think listening to the radio whenever you're driving, if you're on your way to school, on your way home, or, I think that's a good way to kind of, you're in your car, you're already, got a little bit of time on your hands. So, listen to the news there. I think ending your day, now granted, this is someone that goes to bed probably earlier than you guys and most of our listeners, but, watch the nightly news at 10. I think obviously there's I'm not a psychologist, but there's studies that say about, negativity before you go to bed or whatnot isn't always good. So you could argue, well, sometimes the negativity in the news might not be the best, but, I think local news is pretty, pretty fair in that regard. It's not going to mess with your mind too much. And it'll, again, tell you kind of what's happening. I think that's a good way to end your day. So that's kind of a grown-up perspective of it. But I think the best high school journalists, to tell you the truth, are more kind of that grown-up mentality. They're not the best students in our program. They know what's going on, and I don't want to say that you can't be a good student if you never follow the news, but there's a reason why I have the news running in our classroom throughout the day. There's a reason why I talk a lot about following current events. It's going to help you become a better reporter and help you become a better journalist if you know what's going on in the world. And most of the really, really good ones, when they walk in the door, they kind of know what's happening. Nothing catches them totally off guard if there's a big story that's happening.
Speaking of truth and honesty in journalism, as the advisor for the Sidekick, how do you imbue higher levels of journalistic integrity throughout the program?
Well, I think high school journalism's hard because you're serving an audience, students, that most of them, like we've talked about, are not your typical news consumers. I didn't say news consumers, I said typical news consumers, because young people consume a heck of a lot of news. They just, may get it from, different mediums. And I think we're trying to accomplish two different things. Serve an audience, right, with news that is relevant, entertaining, and what they want to consume. We want students to want to read the Sidekick and Coppell Student Media because they'll learn something, they will enjoy it, they'll have a takeaway, they'll know what's going on. Then the other side of it is of the students in the program, we're trying to grow them, right? Trying to develop them as journalists. So the most important thing, not everyone on staff is going to go into journalism, okay? But you talked about the integrity. I think if you establish that, since I said before, that's the most important part of journalism, being a journalist is, having that integrity, having those ethics, doing your job the right way, being factual, et cetera. Okay, so you do that, you learn those skills with the Sidekick, and then you graduate and you go into business, you go into medicine, you go into law, you go into something else. Well, those are skills you got to have, right? It's not like, well, I learned how to be honest, ethical, and have integrity, but now I want to go do this job. I got to start over. Well, no, I mean, that's going to carry on with you throughout your life. So if that answers your question, that's kind of, the way I view it is do those things to serve your audience, but also do those things to help grow yourself as an individual so that you carry on with that once you graduate and move on to better things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, as we tend to say in nearly every episode, on a lighter note, what are some of your favorite memories with this year's Sidekick staff, 2019-2020?
This year's Sidekick staff, well, let's work backwards. I think the day our e-edition released, that was a special day. It coincided with the NSPA online pacemaker announcement. Nishant and Anika got to do the takeover of Coppell ISD's Instagram account, which the district hasn't been very active on Instagram. So I thought that was kind of cool that they asked us to do that. That day, yeah, it was bittersweet just because we weren't together to celebrate those things. But I just think all of that together represented just, where this program with this staff has come. This podcast won a best of show. They've never had a best of show podcast. That was cool. And, I talked to Andrés about, hey, let's put together a special show to enter in that contest. And he did a fantastic job. So that day was just special, just because to see that e-paper come together, knowing all the obstacles, knowing the circumstances. I'll be honest with you. Whenever we started this distance learning, when was our first day? March 23rd. It's kind of like, you're throwing a party and you're hoping people show up. It was kind of like that. Whereas I didn't know, are the kids going to come back and want to work? Are they going to be plugged in? Are they going to be engaged? Are they going to be checked out? Because, part of me, didn't blame them. If a senior's like, you know what, my senior year has been rocked. This is terrible. I am checking out. I am, part of me doesn't blame them. I mean, I would, I'd want to just, virtually put my arm around them and say, hey, hang in there. It'll get better. I understand. The journalist in me and it's hard to expect this of 17 and 18-year-olds, but the journalist in me is like, hey, this is the time when you go to work. This is the time when people need you. This is the time when, when things are bad, that's when journalism really picks up. Whenever Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans in 2005, I mean, there were reporters that we met, reporters and photographers at Dallas Morning News that went down there to cover, that were sleeping in the jail because that was the only place they could stay. They didn't have hotels or anything. So they had to go to work, and that was it. Whenever, at 9/11, the day of the terrorist attacks, I mean, the New York Times had to put out a special edition that evening, the day of the worst terrorist attack in the history of the United States. Now, I don't mean to compare this to those situations, but in a teenager's life, this is pretty severe. So
Yeah.
I didn't know how people would respond. So April 17th, I think, really kind of symbolized that, wow, these guys, they're journalists. They understand where they're at. Now, granted, not everyone on staff has come back. There's some that I have not heard from since March 6th when we went to spring break. That's okay. But the core group, enough people for us to pick up where we left off, has been here. And, that's one memory. The boot camp, summer camp back in July at West, seeing everyone at that and starting to meet people. Just every off the floor day is always fun and exciting. Every time, I look forward to Mondays. I know, some people are like, oh gosh, that's when we do announcements. You got to hear all that stuff. Man, I look forward to that, because other days everybody just kind of comes in and gets to work, where I just like that we can just kind of, interact with each other a little more on Mondays. So those kind of stand out to me.
With the future in mind, what good qualities and aspects of this year's staff do you hope are replicated in those of years to come?
Yeah, I say pretty much every year about, oh, this is such a great staff that's, left behind, a legacy of accomplishments, and it's just they've laid the groundwork for even better things moving forward. And I mean that when I say that. This year is obviously different because this is uncharted waters that we haven't, fortunately, had to go through, and hopefully we don't have to go through again. Hopefully we're back in August. I mean, we don't know any of these things. Mm-hmm. So I think understanding how this group rallied together and realize that their job as journalists really was even more important whenever this pandemic crisis started, and that we needed to provide a service to our audience, but also, and what I like about journalism and what we do is these life skills and learning opportunities are authentic. We couldn't create or simulate this situation. We don't create or simulate the news, and few programs at school offer that, where every day is not planned out for me. There's teachers that have a lesson plan and every day of the year, whereas, and I love this part of what we do. I don't have to do that just because I don't know what's going to be happening a month from now, a week from now, or even tomorrow. And so we come to class each day just kind of, okay, what's happening? What's going on in the now? What do we need to be looking at? What do we need to be doing? So this year's staff is a testament to that, and will be a great example of the resiliency that you need as a reporter, and the opportunity you have, and how, I hate it. It's hard to have those expectations, and I've tried not to have unrealistic or honestly unfair expectations of, I got to remind myself, these are still students. They're still teenagers. They're still in school. They're not adults on a payroll that have to be at work. So I had to be understanding, and I will still, am understanding if someone is like, what? And there's been some that's told me, they're like, I'm having a hard time. I'm not feeling it. I can't do this. And that's okay. I don't want to push and say, well, you're a reporter, get out of bed and go do your job. No. But I know there's some that I think doing the work in Sidekicks probably helped them. And it's kind of maybe give them a little bit of comfort and kind of normalcy, and that we had a system in place to do our work. We didn't have to reinvent the wheel. It changed, it altered, but you know what? We had the system in place where we could pick up and go. And I think that whenever I reflect back on this year's group, it'll prove that, what I'm telling you, this is why it's important, because look what the 1920 staff did under extreme circumstances. And, another side of it too is the importance of following the system. Think about it. We're learning now why it's important to save things properly in our drives, because, if you're looking for file photos, if they're saved properly and nice and organized, it's much easier to find them, because we need those now. I've had students say, well, I don't have my style book. It's sitting in D115. Whenever I've kind of always said, keep your style book handy with you, well, now it's sitting in D115. So things like that, I can kind of be able to reflect back and say that it's kind of important why you got to follow the rules and know the system. If you weren't familiar with by March how we do things, what the expectations are, you left for spring break not knowing what was going to be on the other end. So, but the most important thing is I just think the resiliency and the ability to answer the challenge, to not just do the job, but do it incredibly well, do it better than literally anyone around. I think this staff should be very, very proud of that, as I am.
Okay, and our last question. If you had a chance to give a verbal message to the entire 2019-2020 staff, what would it be?
Well, I don't want to give away what I said in my banquet recording, because I do just that. But I think, I'm not a lovey-dovey, huggy type of person, I'm not Mrs. Springer. Who is, right? But I feel the same way she does about the kids in our program, as far as the love, appreciation, respect, I feel all those same things. I'm just not as gifted as expressing it and as just having people want to run up to you and bear hug you like Miss Springer. I'm not a hugger, but if I see Miss Springer, I better get my hug, But, it's big picture wise. We've talked about journalism throughout this conversation, but man, these are amazing people. Andrés is exactly the type of, result you want from your program, and then you, Alishba, a senior that comes in. I didn't know you, this time last year. And now we're sitting here doing a podcast, with someone that started as a ninth grader, someone that joined the program as a senior. And I said this to you before, it's awesome to have someone their senior year say, yes, for this elective, I want to do the Sidekick, because man, it's a lot. And I know that as a senior in high school, I would not have done the Sidekick. I would have checked out. That is too much work. This guy's crazy. Okay. But you guys do it. And I just think that I appreciate that so much. And Andrés has done a little bit of everything, and seeing him grow. And so this is a special group that's graduating. And, I don't know what I'm going to do after May 21st, because to me, I've been busier almost now than I have before, we were sent home to finish the school year. So what am I going to do with all this time, when we're stuck at home and I don't get to do this? So it's been therapeutic to me too. So my message would just be, as proud as I am of everyone as journalists, I'm more proud of everyone as people. And good things will come from this. I know it's hard to see that in the short term right now, but good things will come from it. And, a lot of people that have dealt with stuff tend to deal with things a little better. Think about it. There's different perspectives for this. There's kids whose parents have divorced. There's kids that have had to start new schools. There's kids that have their parents have lost their jobs. There's kids that have dealt with sickness in their family. Or, that's real stuff. So for a lot of people, this is the first kind of when real life has really come in and, taken over. They've lost control of what they can do. And that's, that's been harder for some than others. So you see the ones that kind of have that, yeah, I've got through this. This will get me through this. And so I think the good that will come out of this is people will be stronger. They'll appreciate their relationships maybe more. I would hope. I was saying before spring break, whenever seniors and everyone's just like, oh, I can't wait to get out of here. I'm just like, live in the moment, because graduation is going to come. Even with this pandemic, you're going to graduate, right? You're going to get to go to college. Don't be in such a hurry. And maybe it's because as I get older, I kind of see these things, but cherish these days with your friends. Right now when you're home, yeah, you can't be physically with your friends. Cherish the time with your family. Cherish the time that you have with your loved ones, because most people that are going off to college, I mean, you'll miss the time you had with your mom or dad or your brother or your sister or whatnot. So I think living in the moment is important. So if I'm hoping that might be a long term. Usually it is in the short term, but then we kind of get back to our normal ways. But living in the moment, appreciating the days you have, the time you have. I think that's a good life lesson to learn from this.
Thank you, Mr. Wofford, for your heartfelt message. And thank you all for joining us in the 49th episode of the Penny Podcast. Links to all the material we mentioned today can be found below. And we are now down to the last episode of this series. So I'll see y'all next week for that one. Awesome.
Wow.
We did it.
Yay! So one more episode left. That's emotional.
Last one.
Man. So this is 49?
This is 49.
So you're going to end right at 50.